Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Louise Staunton. I work as a curator and I'm also a lecturer here at the Architectural Association. Thank you so much to everyone who has come this evening, and also our invited speakers, Jesko Fezer and Saskia, and especially to the AA for hosting 2 evening sessions that will allow us to debate the current state of affairs of public consultation in the UK and abroad. Julika?
Yes, thank you. I'm Julika Gittner. I'm an artist and an architect, and we both teach a course here together. And I'm also one of the speakers. And we got together and organize these series because we felt it was a very important topic to discuss. And we're very grateful for the AA for hosting it because we feel that this is a really good venue to discuss the issues that we're going to be talking about.
So this evening, we'll be thinking and talking about the dysfunction of public consultation in the context of urban renewal, bringing together artists, designers, activists, curators, legal professionals, and we really want to think about consultation. We'll talk a little bit about what consultation even is, why it might be dysfunctional, and the role that artists, cultural practitioners play in consultation now, but also how they might be able to transform the consultation activities that are taking place for the better, to think about how cultural practices can influence a systemic change within consultation and participation in planning and architecture. So, for those of you who don't really know or understand consultation or know what we mean when we're talking about community or public consultation, what we're talking about is the way that members of the public and key stakeholders make known their thoughts, their desires, and their needs about planning decisions and developments in the public realm. So they take place on large developments, and that really has been in place in this country since the late 1960s. It's a statutory requirement for the largest developments. Publicity about a development is a statutory requirement, and an engagement with members of the public and statutory bodies, statutory stakeholders in the area that the development might affect. And really these words here, consultation, participation, collaboration, these things we find to be ubiquitous in our workplace, in the work of urban design, in planning, that they've almost come to mean nothing, really. They sound wonderful, and I think that if they were practiced with integrity, that they are incredibly meaningful. But they sort of come under this banner of consultation, which I think fundamentally is flawed or is being practiced in a particular way.
And I think particularly in relation to urban regeneration and also housing in London, these terms have become quite empty, and there's a lot of pushback from residents, from campaign groups, from activists, from people who are sort of beginning to say things that we've sort of collected some on the right-hand side, you know, this is just a tick box exercise, this is just a resident appeasement, it has nothing to do with engagement, this is a pseudo thing. So the way that these things are being practiced and actually implemented on the ground, so to speak, is not satisfactory at all. So all of those movements, all of those people have been sort of trying to find ways to resist. Art, obviously, and cultural creative work is part of that. But I think Claire and I got together to arrange this series and also to teach the course that we teach here because we feel that there's a little bit of a sort of dead end. This has been going on for a long time. There's a lot of discontent. There's a lot of ideas about how this could be different. but it seems quite difficult to kind of actually change something. So
I would also say what we're missing off of that list is consultation fatigue. I think particularly in the United Kingdom, there is a culture of consultation. So consultation has come to mean a number of different things, but really the idea that the citizens ought to be consulted in order for any major decisions to be made is everywhere. Everywhere, to the point that it no longer has much meaning, and people no longer want to be asked over and over and over again what they think about something, either because they don't want to continue saying the same thing, or they don't want to keep feeding in information, or they know that in most instances that these thoughts that they have are meaningless to those who are actually making the decisions or having influence and power. And there have been some attempts at addressing the fatigue or the pseudo-participation. Sadiq Khan in 2018 brought in a ballot, an estate regeneration ballot, whereby any major regeneration program that was to involve demolition had to have the permission of the residents of the estate, had to have their permission to do so, to demolish and rebuild, as opposed to refurbishment, retrofitting or refurbishment. And on paper, that seems like an incredible idea. It is moving towards a more democratic system, or actually enacting these democratic wishes through a voting system. But within the City Hall itself, led largely by Sean Berry, who's now an MP, an investigation to look at how the ballot system was working, whether in fact it was making the decision-making about demolition or refurbishment more democratic. And they found that even, is it Civitas, the body responsible for checking whether elections are fair and legal, they identified that it was, I feel like you want to come in on that.
Civica Election Services.
Civica, thank you. Civica said that it was corrupt and it wasn't working, it wasn't a fair, and it wasn't a legal election or balloting system. So despite these good intentions, in fact, it was also Sean Berry who suggested that other things ought to be put in place to, funding in fact, to support residents to be able to more fairly represent themselves within the ballot system. And I say represent themselves. Representing themselves is a huge part of what Julika and I are really interested and invested in. The ways that residents can represent themselves in these planning decisions, and thinking about the role of culture and art as a tool for representation.
I think that's sort of adding to this image. I think probably everybody knows the cartoon on the left, and it's obviously, it's sort of absurd that, people aren't being listened to and decisions are being made before the consultation even starts. And actually, Sean Berry's report on the right-hand side lists the ballots that took place in London, and I don't know, it's probably a bit small for you to read, but every ballot ended up in a yes vote. So the system is working incredibly well for...
Well, yeah,
except one.
Except one, but they've reballoted them. This is the key, exactly, because you're allowed to. That's really important. So they'll reballot them until they get the yes vote.
Until people stop coming to vote.
Yeah.
So in the end, it's 100%.
Yeah. It comes round to the same story. Yep.
So it seems that system is working incredibly well for the powers to be, but not necessarily for the people affected. Claire and I teach a history and theory seminar here, which then looks at the history of what were very progressive and very critical ideas to do with participation, to do with consultation and how it should be done, or how it should be done better, how people could be engaged and involved. And for us, it's really important to sort of trace how these ideas then became sort of warped, abused, watered down to the situation where we're at now, and to talk and sort of think together with our students about ways of actually turning back to the original ideas and trying to find ways of, how can this still work today? How can it be relevant? And sort of, I guess, in resistance to the sort of watered down versions.
Just thinking about John Roberts, the theorist, the political theorist, talks about failed revolutions, reenacting or re-engaging with failed revolutions, and kind of looking back to this radical call for participatory democracy emerging out of the civil rights movement in the United States in 1968 really inspired all of these ideas of involving the citizenship in decision making. And I think that it definitely has failed, not just when it's been brought to this country, but when it has moved from being this sort of participation in the truest sense, having ownership over one's life and the way that resources are distributed, and the way when it begins to move into legislation, when it begins to move into the bureaucratic systems that need to enact them, that they've lost that sort of radical root, taking that word literally.
So last slide for our introduction. We really do want to think about the role of culture, and we are very aware that culture and cultural practice is also in a very compromised and often controversial position. The term art washing obviously indicates that there's also complicit work between artists or creative practitioners and developers, or the powers to be. So it's not necessarily that culture has this sort of alternative role. It can also have a role that supports questionable processes. But there are examples that we want to sort of celebrate and talk about in this series of people who have practiced and are practicing in a way that sort of resists what is the current practice of consultation. I'm looking around the room, and there's Lorraine here. Lorraine Leeson, who's talking in the next event, who was part of the Docklands poster campaign, which is, of course, a wonderful and very seminal example of that sort of work. But I think we are very keen not to sort of just bring about sort of best practice examples. We're really keen to explore how a more sort of systemic change can be thought about or talked about, and that's why we're here today.
So today, the speakers, when we've finished, the speakers will give quite short presentations, just 15 minutes, because we really want to try and generate a debate. We really would like to involve everyone who's here in the discussion as much as we can do, to think about what systemic changes are needed to foreground alternative or counter consultations, alternative resistant forms of consultation, and to discuss the controversial role of culture. So Saskia will start, followed by Jesko, and then Julika, and then we'll have time for questions, and we're hoping that it will all flow together. So I'd like to introduce Saskia O'Hara, who is a legal professional, and she manages the Public Interest Law Centre's gentrification project, which supports access to justice in the class-based transformation of urban space. And she's worked on public law challenges across London, and in the last 10 years in particular has supported the Focus E15 campaign in East London, as a prominent strategic member and active on other grassroots local campaigns. And we're really happy to have Jesko Fezer, who's come over from Germany. He's a professor for experimental design at HFBK Hamburg and St. Pauli public design support that he does through his professorship and with his students. He writes, practices, teaches, publishes around participation in relation to design, architecture, and creative practice, and recently published a book on participation that is currently German language only and is titled
umstrittene Methoden.
Yeah. And we're really happy to have you here, Jesko, not only because of your expertise in rethinking participation, but to offer a different perspective on the issues that we're dealing with here locally, and to think about the parallels that might be present in Germany and the UK. And actually, I've decided I'm not going to introduce Julika. Other than she is an artist and an architect and teaches across both disciplines. I feel like, yeah.
Perfect.
Brilliant.
All right.
Indeed. Cool.
So,
Thanks.
Just give me a sec because we need to.
Yeah, all good. Yeah, all good. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. It's really interesting for me, coming from the legal world, but more importantly, coming from a campaigning world, to engage with all these different aspects that are really impacting planning and housing in London and across country. So it's really great to be here. I'm just going to dive in because I agree it'd be really good to hear from everyone else in the room. So yeah, a couple of words about the gentrification project. As a law centre, primarily we seek to litigate. What does that mean? That means offering communities across London and in different cities across England law as a tool to use in their campaigns. And primarily in relation to this project, that means communities, for example, who are living on estates, who don't want to see their homes demolished. Maybe they're fighting for green space, but we, give them access to legal tools, litigation, also education as well, informing people about planning and where the law fits into it, but with a campaigning mindset. Sometimes people call that movement lawyering, but we don't want to put too fine a kind of point on it, but that's what we're trying to do. And yes, I'm also part of a housing campaign outside of my day job. I've been doing it for a very long time, and I've been part of this campaign for about 13 years. I will be there on Saturday, like every Saturday. And, you know, I'm here as well today to kind of come from that lens as well. This is an amazing campaign. We've been going for 13 years, and we've been doing all sorts of actions. It started in a hostel for young people where there was a mother and baby unit, and all these women were given eviction notices on the same day and said, you need to leave London. And that's what sparked this campaign. This campaign's still going. The picture is the campaign blocking the road after doing a deputation at a council meeting and handing in a legal complaint about conditions that people in temporary accommodation were living in. Okay. Cool. Okay, I think the introduction was fabulous, and I don't know that I need to say too much more about the issues with consultation. But what you see on those slides are real words from people I speak to day in, day out, in my job or at the weekend, who are being consulted, you know, on estates and elsewhere. And just like your list that you already had, here's another list. This is not transparent. We've never had so much money spent on suites, bouncy castles, and so-called community fun days. This is not a consultation. Well, in the introduction, we heard a little bit about resident ballots, and I'm really glad that that's been kind of talked about already, because I'm going to talk a little bit more about resident ballots. Just a little word on this. The other thing I'm hearing a lot is that consultation on estates, certainly in London, seem to be a front for demolition. Why are people saying that? Well, a suggestion is that 9 times out of 10 estates are being demolished. Many residents on estates don't want their estates to be demolished. And they always wonder, well, when we said it lots in the consultation, why does it keep coming back to it? So a lot of the time what I'm hearing is that actually these things are a front for demolition. I've got a few of these that I've also stuck up on the slide, which is a guide that we produced last year, which is all about different estate demolition subsidy models and information to give campaigners so that they understand what's being proposed on their estates outside of the consultation documents that they're being presented with. If anyone wants some, I have 4. First come, first served. yeah, I mean, I won't focus in on it, but again, what we're seeing a lot in our work is that demolition is no coincidence or accident. It's a way for local authorities to get the most capital out of land. And I won't go into that any further, but we can have a chat about it after for anyone that wants to. All right, moving on. Consultation on the law. I am here also as a legal professional, so I thought it might be useful to run through a little bit of what the law is in this country in relation to consultation. This one might take a little bit of time, but I think it might be useful for the discussion. So there are public law principles in this country related to consultation. They're called the Gunning Principles. I'm seeing nodding heads, you know the Gunning Principles. They're really important. They were introduced in about 1985, and there's 4 principles, which I'm going to go through now. Principle 1, consultation must take place where the proposal is at a formative stage. What does that mean? It means the outcome must not have been predetermined, or the consultation process advanced to the stage where a particular decision was inevitable. This does not mean that a public body, like a council, cannot have narrowed consultation options to a few choices, including a preferred option, but this must be made clear to consultees, like community people. Okay, principle 2. Sufficient reasons must be put forward for the proposal to allow for intelligent consideration and response. What does it mean? It means the information needs to be clear, not misleading, and if a particular proposal relies on technical information, it needs to be presented in a way that can be easily understood. Number 3, adequate time must be given for consideration and response. This is a bit of a funny one because there's no set definition for adequate time, but what the law tells us is that 4 days is not enough, 5 days is not enough. But it's a bit of a funny one, so it's based on the facts. And finally, Gunning Principle number 4, consultation responses must be conscientiously taken into account. What does that mean? That means that, let's say, a council, public body, must show that they've considered all the consultation responses. Now, our broad question, are these principles rock solid and brilliant when we're dealing with shoddy consultations? No, they can be quite useful. They can be quite useful. But for example, as many people here probably already know, for example, call it a planning application and a community puts in a fabulous objection that is really well researched. Maybe it has a lot of, planners involved, all sorts. You know, if a planning committee, or more importantly, an officer, just writes down an officer report that so-and-so's put in this, here it is, that is enough to kind of pass that legal test. So that's the legal test. I think it's important for us to know it. It can be useful, but it's not rock solid. Moving on. All right, some kind of examples. The Carpenter's estate is in Newham in East London. That estate has been, more precisely, the residents of that estate and the local community have been fighting the demolition of that estate since 2001, which is a really long time. And residents have been getting decanted from that estate since 2005. That means typically people that are in council homes, secure council tenancies, and the council moves them off because they intend to demolish, redevelop an estate. And a few years ago, Public Interest Law Centre started working with residents. The housing campaign I'm part of has been involved in the Carpenter's estate and the fight for the estate. And what when there was a resident ballot on the estate, which was really interesting because we found out some interesting facts about consultation and about these resident ballots, which, as you've already seen, all produce yes votes. Like, how does that happen? Well, I'll tell you how. Okay, money. So, on the Carpenter's estate, a campaign group, so the campaign group that's around the estate, submitted a Freedom of Information request, which asked, how much money is the council spending on this consultation process that comes before the ballot, which is a yes or a no to a document. The document is called a landlord offer, and 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, that offer is regarding mass demolition of homes. Well, what they found out is this. Newham Council spent at least £350,000 on consultancy services, including events, visual promotion, and door knocking, with a clear and systemic bias towards a yes vote. I've got a further breakdown of those figures, which I won't go into now, but for example, £4,400 was spent on a Carpenter's Estate Community Fund Day. This is on an estate that has suffered from managed decline like many estates across the city. It's a lot of money, right? It's certainly a lot of money when people are seeing their estate declining. We shared that information with Shan Berry, who produced that fabulous report, which again has already been showed. It's brilliant, it's really worth reading. Another example that's given in that report from Shan, which I think is really interesting, is about Achilles Street in Lewisham, where they also submitted an FOI request and about the same thing. And the response revealed that over £30,000 had been spent by the council on a company called Studio Raw. Studio Raw is a PR and branding company that was hired for 1 day a week by the council for 3 months before Achilles Street resident ballot took place. The description of the company is this: we are Studio Raw, a design studio that explores collaborative, creative, and experimental solutions within urban communities. Our projects incorporate elements from a variety of disciplines, including branding, graphic design, digital, and community engagement. Our dynamic approach to design allows us to deliver large-scale strategic projects seamlessly and cohesively. It's a lot of words, isn't it? But what does it mean? It means we'll push this through and people won't complain so much because we're coming at them. But it's shocking, right? It's difficult. And again, in that area of London, campaigners and residents talked about, being pushed into a yes vote over tea and cake. On the Carpenter's estate, I even heard about one resident who was taken out for dinner. I'm not joking. It's absolutely chaos. All right, cool. So, what did we do after we found out that so much money was being spent on the Carpenter's estate? Well, PILC, and more importantly, campaigners and residents started campaigning and launched the demand for a resident empowerment fund. And the idea was simply to level the playing fields. If the council can spend this amount of money to secure a yes vote, well, what about people who want to question it, who may even want to fight for a no vote? Where are the resources? And, the campaign went pretty well. There was like a big email writing kind of campaign. We went on BBC London News about the issue. It got into quite a lot of news outlets. And it done so well that actually the Resident Empowerment Fund was voted through the London Assembly to be included in the 2022-23 draft budget. And Sadiq Khan kind of kiboshed it. And this is what he said. He rejected it. He basically claimed he did not recognise the characterisation of estate residents being frequently left unaware or having little confidence in the processes of communication. So yeah, I'll just leave that there for a minute. I'm not going to speak for too much longer, but what I did want to say is that I think it's always really good to talk about other examples of what's going on. We have a case that is being heard in Manchester in March. It's regarding a plot of land in Manchester. A developer wants to build student accommodation on that land. The community have been fighting for that land for a long time. There's an old pub on it currently that hasn't been used for a long time. And some architects called Unit 38 have been working with residents for years now to develop an alternative plan. And I think that is a nice and a good example of consultation with communities and using some of these fabulous skills to push things forward. And they've just launched this website. So I encourage everyone to check it out because they're great. finally, I cannot do this talk without giving a shout out to Focus E15's kind of resident artist, Andrew Cooper. Every week on the street, this artist, Andrew, comes and he does consultation with people in the street. And how does he do it? Well, he works with people to create the most fabulous banners that people directly contribute to, children directly contribute to on a weekly basis. And they've become the most kind of powerful assets that we as a campaign have. So yeah, I just totally echo what was said at the start about actually art can be amazing in this, in this realm as well. So I wanted to say that. And I think I'm gonna leave it there, but thank you very much. That's my deets, there you go.
That was perfect timing.
That was super fast, thanks. Tried to get it. It's so nice to be here. Thanks a lot for inviting me to this amazing institution. I'm happy and a bit excited. I will talk about something completely different to a certain degree, but I'm sure you will find some interesting relations. So since we prepare a bit for a discussion, I also decided to only show a very small project to make it very easy to understand also what it means in practice. And what I want to explain you is the Public Design Support Program. In German, it's called Öffentliche Gestaltungsberatung, that we started 2011 in Hamburg, St. Pauli. Hamburg, St. Pauli in the 90s was the poorest neighborhood in whole West Germany. It became heavily gentrified in the last 20 years, many evictions, new buildings, maybe you know the Hafenstraße squattings in the 80s, who played a big role there. In the meanwhile, it's a different area, but for those still living there, for cheap rents, it's even harder to survive in this kind of hostile, gentrified, touristified area. And we worked there in cooperation with social workers, with a community organization, community workers, which is called GWA St. Pauli. They work there since the 70s, have very strong, close relations to the neighborhood, and are very active also in kind of pushing protests and urban conflicts to put them into practice. For example, the Park Fiction Project, maybe some of you know, is also something that the GBR was supporting strongly in the late 90s, early 2000s. When I came to Hamburg as professor for experimental design, I contacted the GWA St. Pauli and asked them if it would be interesting for them to integrate artists and young designers, planners from our art school into the program. They have rent advice from lawyers, they have family advice, they work with kids, they support migrants with filling in papers, they support homeless people or people who have difficulties to deal with the bureaucracy. So they have a lot of consultation program running all the time there, and I wanted to add a design consultation program. And they found it quite funny, but they wanted us not to use the word design, because that's the word of the enemy. So we called it Gestaltungsberatung. And the idea is quite simple, and that's the only thing I will present right now. Since 2011, each Wednesday, a group of students, with or without me, goes there for 1 hour from 6 to 7 p.m. People can come around with whatever they have in mind, problems, issues, ideas, wishes, trouble, just want to talk with us. And we try to build projects on their behalf, with them, in collaboration with them as our clients. We do only practical projects that tend to be realized in one-to-one, and we only work in groups, so my students always form groups from 3 to 10 people. And to give you a bit of impression, it started with the slogan, don't do it yourself, and we went into a community space at the central place in St. Pauli. It's called the Colibri, and we just used a table and made a tent and had some information flyers. And our first client, that's her, came there by accident. She wanted to go to the rent consultation with a lawyer, Christiane, over there. But there was somebody already, so we took her and talked to her. In the end, it was a rent issue, so it didn't work out. The next project we got was some residents of a nearby high-rise building. It's here on this image. It was privatized, and they wanted to get rid of all the inhabitants to renovate it and to rent it to better off people. And they wanted to organize themselves, but there was no space in the building. So we supported them with a kind of stackable, simple indoor furnitures, which they could just plug in without destroying the ceiling, which was asbestos problematic in the building. So they organized themselves and tried to delay the eviction. At least they started to do it. We also worked in the early years with the Esso-Häuser, a building nearby at the Reeperbahn with many small and very cheap apartments. The building, the area was sold to a private investor, and the building was already about to be demolished. And we built a kind of 1-to-5 model with the inhabitants to discuss alternative plans. And in the end, we just made a big barbecue out of it to gather them. And the initiative was quite successful in delaying the process, in getting their rights pushed through together with the GBA, and even become part of the design process for the buildings which are not built in the meanwhile. We also have a lot of smaller problems. A single mother with her daughter had a big storage problem, all the stuffs and chairs and their shoes in the apartment. We designed together with them a shelf out of a prefab standard storage shelf. In Savamala in Belgrade, we had a workshop. It was quite more traumatic. A family of 7, a Roma family, their building was burnt down a week ago before we appeared by racist Belgrade inhabitants. And we just built with them all the furniture. So a bed for 7 people, for the boy, a storage school system, a kitchen chair, kitchen furniture. There was more kind of really on-site working process supporting them in their practical needs. The same, or a little bit different, in a refugee camp in Lübeck. We were invited to help the residents to build the kitchen, to improve their bed, sleeping situation, but also just clean the showers in the basement and install a separation wall to give some more intimacy. We were asked by the Seebrücke e.V., campaign for refugees and for safe harbors in Europe to support a big demonstration. And for them, we built a kind of illegal monument in the name of the city of Hamburg for those who died at the border of the European Union. And it was the end point of the demonstration, and then it was taken down by the police because it was illegally. After a few years, we changed from this community space, the Colibri, 2 buildings ahead in the team space where the social workers met several times, and we refurbished it and could also use the street a bit more actively to hang out and to offer our consultation and workforce to neighbors. In the evening, it's quite a cozy place there. Did a parade to train people to build slogans with letters they wrote and how to reorganize demonstration or campaigns with a kind of typeset. We worked together with a subcultural institution, the Golden Pudel Club in Hamburg, which did burn down by accident, and helped them to rebuild it, very practical, but also to imagine the new space. Here you can see how we put a 1-to-1 scale situation of the kitchen, and they could discuss how to rebuild the kitchen, how their offices and how the club will work like. A person with a small garden at the periphery of Hamburg, their caravan was broken and the sun shield was blown away, so we just helped them to build a new sunshade and a kind of wind trouser there. And so it's, in a way, sometimes it's really individuals who suffer from the living conditions in small apartments and cannot afford to kind of handle the things themselves. They don't have the time, the resources, the money to change their apartment, and they suffer a lot from being unhappy with also some very pragmatic things. And on the other hand, it's a lot of political initiatives who come to us in the struggles and need some support at some moment. For example, the Café Exil, it's most of them lawyers or social workers who support migrants in their struggles with the bureaucracy to get the kind of things filled in and not to make many mistakes. They wanted us to help them to provide more intimate situations to talk about these problematic issues. And we wanted to do new tables for them. But in the process, which went in this case 2 years, they had to move because they were thrown out of this cafe. And so we were organizing the whole moving process and also built these triangular tables. The idea was to little bit break out the dialectic situation between the experienced German lawyer and the migrant, and to have kind of triangular discussions at the tables there. We also worked with a refugee group. They call themselves the Lampedusa group in Hamburg. They wanted to have a monument they could use for the demonstrations, manifestations, and build up very simply and store in their tent, which they had at the time at the main station in Hamburg. We worked with a group at the memorial of the concentration camp in Hamburg, nearby Hamburg, Neuengamme. They wanted to have a growing monument for those who survived the concentration camp, but their names are not represented there. It's many Ukrainian, Netherlands, but German, Russian, and Belarus, a lot of Jewish people who lived and died there. It's a project that we started 2018 and are still working on this monument, renovating it and keeping it going with them. We worked for school kids in Greece for 2 weeks in the courtyard and in the interior of the building, but also with elderly people in the neighborhood of St. Pauli who wanted to have a meeting point for the daily encounter, and we used the furniture that was in the storage there and added some elements to make a bench, a table, and a more exciting situation for them. And here, one example also in a small apartment nearby our consultation office, Flora, it's not her real name. She was suffering from diverse issues, was babysitting dogs from neighbors, but had no income, and spent a lot of time at home in her apartment. And she was really, in a way, fed up with it. She couldn't stand the situation. Not the apartment was more an effect of it. And we also, in these cases, we also asked social workers or psychologists to join us in the process dealing with the clients. And in this almost 2 years collaboration, we met her very often in her apartment, built up a nice relationship. But she wasn't able to change something in her apartment. Even the things that she found out didn't work for her. And so we suggested at one moment to just make a test. We built her one addition for her kitchen, one shelf extension, and these 4 elements to rise her bed because she had too less space to store stuff beneath. And we found out that it was so complicated for her to change anything like this. And in the end, she just did keep these kind of bed elevation elements because that worked for her, but she wasn't able to change her apartment. And she's still in contact with us and with the social workers, but it was shocking for us, and what we experience often, that people who suffer from the conditions in a gentrified area, really the apartment is such a overloaded place with problems, experiences, and ideas that they really often cannot handle it in a very practical way. This was a community at Hansaplatz who wanted to change the place, which was heavily under CCTV control by the police, and wanted to be there more present. And we built a series of furnitures we gave to several individuals and institutions, and then they could use it to use the place as a meeting point for encounter. And this was for a bench for an organization who works with homeless people, and which has extended the hostile mini benches which were installed there already. Project in Turkey, in the Kurdish area. I skip here a project together with an initiative in Berlin, who built an illegal monument against police brutality and discrimination of migrants, and we renovated it with them. Let's say we rebuilt it with much stronger materials, but it looked the same as before. And then it was torn down by the city a few months later illegally, and we managed to force them to bring it back, but it was more or less destroyed, and this was the re-inauguration. with initiatives working there. In Italy, in Venice, we had the chance to work together with a group of squatters who are very active in fighting touristification and gentrification in Venice. And they squat empty former social housing by the building in certain areas. It's the Assemblea Sociale per la Casa. And they do a lot of political activist work. They help people from to not getting evicted by the police. But in their own apartments, it's not really working for them. And so we helped someone to repair the shutters in their apartment. We built here a baby bed for a couple who was expecting a child, or renovated the kitchen of some activists. So it was a support of the supporters and care for the care workers. And we were very thankful to, like in all the projects, to get, on the one hand, a lot of information about the political processes of the urban development processes, of the structure of the city, and the legal situations there, but also a lot of insight into the private living conditions, into their struggles as individuals and as political activists. One of the last projects I want to show is Anna's Doppelwohnung, also an elderly person nearby. We knew her for a while from just hanging out there, and she lived in an apartment that was quite cheap, but the landlord wanted to show her out since decades. She lives there since the 90s. And that affected her kind of personal situation very much. She was fighting against it and she survived in that apartment, but the pressure over decades made her really super uncomfortable. And so she was looking for a second apartment a little bit. And she found a place which was funded and safe in a nearby area by the city, but she couldn't move out. There was so much pressure on her that now she had 2 apartments. But she couldn't afford even one of them, and she was running out of money and didn't move there. And so she came to us, and we had no clue how to deal with her. And we did suggest her to try out to move to a new apartment and to rent the apartment for a while informally to someone. In the end, we found one of our students who needed an apartment for a year, and we did paint it for her, help her to sort the stuff, bring something over there, and she moved there, and she was quite happy there, and it helped her to kind of let loose this apartment, and now it's still in her hands, but she's renting it to some other people and profiting from it a bit. A project, Lagerhaus G, part of the concentration camp, where the companies profiting from the work of the Jewish prisoners, but also of soldiers from Italy, are still having the companies in this area, and we were marking them in a public demonstration with these banners. It's a long story. Or a small apartment of Besma. She's sharing a small apartment with her son and uses the sofa to sleep there in the small living room. And we just built a box for her to store the linen and the stuff during the day, and painted a wall and brought in a curtain. So this is a bit the range of projects, long-term projects with political initiatives and small-scale projects in the apartment to make the daily struggle a bit more acceptable for those in the apartment. This is a model of some of the projects. You can see a bit method, the working relations, the processes. You cannot see it, but it's in the model. And you see also the Colibri, where we have been in the beginning, and the space we have been the last 8 years. And this November we moved back to the Colibri. We made a public moving performance with all the neighbors there, and we are now back in the bigger community space, because especially after Corona, it was quite hard to stay in contact with the community, to meet people informally. And in this space, there's cooking, there's different consultations. So we are re-establishing, reinventing it, like all the time with new students, but this time a bit more dramatically. If I have 5 more minutes.
No, but you've got a few.
A few?
3.
3. Okay. A term we use to describe this practice is partisan or biased design. Maybe it's not very well fitting and badly translated. And with this diagram, maybe I can briefly show 6 design perspectives on how to relate to kind of social issues. In this lower part, I've drawn kind of a few stakeholders, social individuals or groups who are kind of in a permanent constitutive conflict about their perspectives, their ideas, their ideas, how transformation should take place. And in the upper part, there is kind of more the contemporary and the future world, which design, in a way, intervenes in perspectives, in transformation processes. And to keep it very short, these are 6 design models. And I just briefly give them names. Number 1 is the heroic designer, who is not interested in the stakeholders in the social field, but just directly brings out ideas, transformation concepts, and he knows what to do. And it's mostly a male person. Then there is the classical designer, who is an affirmative practitioner, and he accepts a briefing of a competent, well-off client who has a automobile company or a housing company or is in the city council, and he does whatever this person wants. He does marketing, he does kind of all this kind of stuff that designers usually do. This is also quite boring and maybe a little bit out of fashion. Then there are designers who try to understand a bit more about social conflicts, about social situations, about the stakeholders' perspectives, and they do research, maybe market research or ethnological, fill out papers, hang out a bit, and they try to kind of understand the situation and do something, intervene directly into the real world without too much complications. Then there are 3 more contemporary models. The one is often called critical design. It's more into an intervention into the conflict that is already there. They try to bring in ideas, speculations, tools, moments that kind of enforce the productive discussions between stakeholders. Number 5 is more the participatory strategy. They try to build up frameworks of discussion, arenas for meeting, online tools for balloting or whatever. And they also deal with this kind of conflict which is in between different stakeholders. And this is what we are interested in right now, is the bias or the partisan design perspective, which kind of directly supports and aligns its tools and perspective with people affected by social discrimination, by urban injustices, and works with them together to enable them, and you mentioned a similar thing, to get on a level where discussion makes sense, and to support them in a conflict which is already there, either in their private life or in their kind of political interests. And this is a model which I think is super interesting in design, to look for new clients, partners which are not usually clients or partners of architecture, planning, and design practice. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That scale of design types, I felt like was an inversion of Sherry Arnstein's ladder of participation that we had on one of the slides, which is, I'm sure that you know, is sort of speaking about the scale of participation. And you know, if you were to inverse that with the designers, it seems to tally.
Yeah, the scheme is super interesting and super helpful to understand, and we try to start at a different point, which is hard. But we come back to that.
Great. So lastly, I'm going to try and be very short. I've been working on providing counter representations through my art practice, which is mainly sculpture, performance and video, to sort of counteract some of the sort of problems of how information or facts or data is represented as part of consultations or as part of the kind of making public of changes in our cities. Because I think that is absolutely key. The way that people read, understand, and access this kind of information means that they're either able to act and react to it or not, because it's not clear, it's not there, it's not understandable in some way. I'm going to show very briefly 3 projects that I think talk about sort of 3 slightly different aspects of this. On the one hand, the problem that sort of political hierarchies or the bureaucracy as it's working with its representatives and decision makers is often not visible or not even understandable to the ordinary citizen. In the project here, that applies to a place that I lived until, where I lived until last year in Walthamstow in East London. Where it wasn't clear to me, and I was a resident there, who was actually behind a sort of large-scale privatization of the public square there and the proposed overdevelopment of that square at the same time. So the idea that if I don't understand who's actually behind this, how can I actually, who do I get in touch with if I want to have a say in this process? And the next project then talks about the idea of misrepresentation or misinformation or disinformation, that I'm not given the right information maybe on purpose, and also ways of questioning the sort of authoritative look, the kind of assumption that data published as part of these consultation processes is in any way politically neutral. So how can we sort of challenge that way of representing information? And then lastly, maybe the idea of making things more intuitively understandable, making data, complex, abstract information more intuitively understandable through objects, and how that could be integrated into public consultation processes. So in Walthamstow, as I said, there was this major project happening, and there was a fabulously active and brilliant campaign group called Save Our Square that were really protesting and having a lot of people and support behind them in resisting this change and saying this is not what we want for our local area. And obviously the plans are going ahead as we speak. So they weren't successful in that way. But I sort of started to get in touch with them and sort of said, I'm really interested in representing who's actually behind this, and do you know? And we spent quite a lot of time trying to understand all the agencies and all the people and all the decision makers, be it public or private, who had been part of this process. And I then set up this sort of diagram, and I felt very much that to counteract the sort of abstraction of this bureaucratic process, it was really important to give these people faces. Now, they're not one-to-one portraits, although the big guy is the person formerly known as the Prince of Wales, and I think he does bear some resemblance, because the Prince's Foundation was also at some point involved in this massive, long planning process. So making these sort of things concrete and also placing them in the square was a way for me to sort of go and say, look, this is really what's happening here. These are the people who are making decisions about your space, and you've never met them. They've probably never been to this square, and here they are. Saskia has already spoken, I think, very eloquently about the kind of problems that people are facing as kind of residents or people encountering these processes. There is a community interest company called Architects for Social Housing who have supported many campaigns against estate demolition in London over the last 10 years, maybe longer. And they already identified a while ago that actually one of the main problems that residents are facing is they don't really understand what's going on, because they're given false information, misinformation, partial information. They don't really actually have the information they need to make an informed decision, as you explained, as they're supposed to be doing through the balloting system. Architects for Social Housing were being asked by a resident group in Brent to save St. Raphael's estate from demolition, and they asked me to try and find a way through making objects that represented important data to sort of bridge the gap between that lots of kind of complex and abstract information that needed to be relayed that was difficult to understand. So here's me with one of those objects. Now, how do these places, how does social space, how does physical space get represented as part of these processes? It gets represented through, well, drawings. You can see the St. Raphael's estate at the bottom right, and incidentally, there's a very, very large redevelopment area of Wembley Park right next to it. You understand now why this estate needs to be demolished or not. But mainly through reports and documents that are full of stats, they're full of graphs, they're full of percentage figures, and they're full of kind of bureaucratic and technocratic language that is completely inaccessible to anybody who doesn't work in the field. The other thing that happens, and Saskia already mentioned this, is a huge machine of professionals gets engaged to produce professional, very slick-looking information. It is a requirement that the local authority does it, and they do it really well. So there's newsletters. In the St. Raphael's estate, there were countless events, meetings, exhibitions, trips, workshops. This is all documented on their website. You can see everyone smiling and super happy to be taking part in this consultation exercise. Then there's, of course, the architects who produce, in this case, ice cream-colored diagrams, and again, pie charts and things like that, to document not only the design process, but also the consultation process itself. So when we look at these kinds of representations, they look solid, they have authority. I'm not going to doubt them. I will just look at them. I probably won't understand them, but I'm certainly not going to say they're not correct, okay, as an ordinary person. Now, when you start looking at them actually a bit closer, which is what I did quite a lot during this time, you find lots of things which are outright wrong, and they're obviously there to manipulate people's opinion in some way, but you also find things that are totally not representative. So if I have 2,000 residents and I ask 23 people, what do you like about your estate or don't like about your estate, it's a meaningless sample. And yes, it gets represented in a way that nobody is going to notice that, right? No one's going to notice that this doesn't make any sense, and it's not worth anything. So also, it was mentioned in the Resident Empowerment Fund that you talked about. Obviously, the discrepancy in sort of representation happens through money. This is ASH, Architects for Social Housing, trying to relay some of the quite complex economic information to the residents that they needed to know about. This is the residents, pinning photocopied A4 pieces of paper to trees, right? Whilst the consultation process in St. Raphael's estate, our Freedom of Information requests found out, cost just under £1 million. Brent Council spent just under £1 million on all these events and all these workshops and all these meetings and all these posters and all of these things they really needed to redevelop that estate. I'm going to try and skip some stuff. So we looked at a lot of this information. I'm just going to bring up one example. How this very neutral-looking information is obviously extremely political, and it's there to manipulate opinion. Here it is claimed that 107% is an increase of crime on the estate from the previous year, and at the bottom it says, hence, design is probably a bit wrong, and we should probably demolish this place to design out crime. I hope that most people in this room would find such a statement at least questionable. So I started doing things like representing some of these statistics. So this is the crime statistics on the estate. And by doing very, very simple things like contextualizing this information, we then find out that actually the worst crime statistics are part of another part of Brent that nobody has proposed to demolish. Now, what's really important for me is that I'm not representing this information three-dimensionally just to make it intuitively more understandable. For me, it's very important that the materiality of these objects carries the possibility to express some of the, in this case, racist connotations that are hidden underneath this very neutral sort of bureaucratic language. And that is something that I think is really important to bring out and make it explicit. I'm going to skip this. So we looked at several different things, the fact that people weren't being told sound right now, but never mind. Let's move to the next slide. I'm going to show you one of those videos. So there were several videos which were made to support the campaign on social media. There were videos about the rent increases, the leaseholders' cost increases, the cost of the consultation and other things. I'm going to show you one. It's only a minute long.
When councils or developers propose to redevelop a social housing estate, they often claim that they will keep rent levels for council tenants as close to current levels as possible. To understand better what this means, we have made some models from household materials. Each section of the object measures 50 pounds. current social rent is £106 per week for a 2-bedroom flat. So-called London affordable rent will be £168. London living rent. Affordable rent. Market rent. Shared ownership rent. This is what they mean by keeping rent as close to current levels as possible. A 60% increase.
The only way to keep your current rent is to stay in your home.
Vote no to redevelopment.
Okay, so I'm going to finish now just to say I'm currently, I've moved to Berlin and I'm working with the Research Institute for Sustainability, where there's people actually looking at how consultations, in this case around mobility changes, low traffic neighbourhoods in Berlin, can be sort of piloted in a way that they are actually more inclusive and that they do work in a better way to sort of engage citizens. This is very difficult. Again, there's lots of stats, there's lots of technical information that needs to be relayed, and they have found, this is halfway through this project, that in terms of people taking part in the online participation tool, there's over 82% of them have A-levels, which is absolutely not representative of the people who live in the area that is undergoing this change, but they are reflecting on other ways of sort of mitigating this and trying to find other ways of doing it. I've been making some objects as part of that. Some of these objects have appeared in public space. Others have appeared also as part of a neighbourhood council. And I've developed some workshops also to relay some of the technical information. Right. We spoke much longer than we wanted to because we want to hear from you. This is really what we're very excited about, that there's lots of people in this room who have ideas and practices that relate to what we're talking about. We wanted to maybe break open the typical sort of Q&A situation by asking some questions ourselves. They turned out to be rather complicated and long, so I'm not sure, but I think these were things that each of us sort of came up with and thought, well, you know, we really want to know. Maybe someone has answers to these questions.
I think it's worth opening it up to the floor if anybody had questions, things to contribute to the discussion. We can, yeah. I think Harriet's got a roaming mic, or should we take the mic round? But also, we didn't clap for Julika.
Oh,
Thank
Hi, is this on? Hi, thanks. Thank you very much for the presentation. That was really amazing to see all the range of different work. So the context I guess I'm familiar with is different in that often the housing is done by private developers, but it seems like it's very similar in the UK where it's by local authorities and developers. And I wonder, because consultation is seen as like a checkbox, and inevitably the extraction of value from land and housing is always about getting as much value as fast as possible. Like, because it's a checkbox, it's done as fast as possible, and consultation is done improperly and leads to, you know, everything that you guys presented. And I wonder, like, are there examples, or is there a way where consultation, or maybe not even worded that way, the integration of the community is done on a more fundamental level, where it's not just, you know, once a week for once a year? Are there examples or instances where the issues that communities have are brought or considered right from the beginning, or throughout the entire process?
I think that question could basically be the title of the discussion tonight.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, but where my head went was coming back to what you said at the start, which is actually, when we think of consultation, I wouldn't argue that there's a lack of activities or a lack of time spent, because as you said, there's definitely like a fatigue of being over consulted, and sometimes it runs for a year and there's workshops for a year. I think really what is interesting is to look at what comes out the other end as a kind of measure for how valuable any of that time was. So it's not exactly an answer to your question. I, spoke a little bit about Unit 38, who are doing some interesting stuff in Manchester. But the proof really of that is if all these elements of a campaign work together, including the legal element to stop the plan for the student accommodation on that plot of land, to see if that consultation that's built those plans can be built, to see if these plans can kind of come through. So that's, my thoughts.
Maybe I can add a point. It's quite interesting in relation to what you said before about the letter of participation and how to turn it around. I mean, one deficit of all these consultation projects, of urban renewal projects, we have the same in Germany, that if there's a bigger project, people can have a say, they can see the plans, they can meet, they can whatever. But at the moment this process starts, there are some positions cleared, a driving direction is defined, a question is framed, a situation, and then the others have to react on it. And this is where kind of these techniques of participation can be implemented from just fake participation up to more seriously done. But if citizen control, which is the end of the letter of participation, is the point where things start, when people are able to engage for the neighborhood, are able to engage for new community center, for public spaces, then it's the city or the owners of the landlords who have to kind of react. And this is always a bit a problem for all kind of architects, artists, designers, that they kind of go into settings which are defined by those who have the say or the money to define these situations as problematic or something to change. And this is a bit why we change in this kind of small experiment. We say people come and they decide about what we discuss and what we do, even if it's super small, and it's not the city or the landlords who decide what is the discussion right now. And I think this is a bit one of the fundamental problems we cannot really change, that the field of play and the rules are already set when a consultation process starts, and in the end you can just try to survive in it. And it's super interesting to hear about how bad this works.
Do you have any thoughts to add? Oh, Tom, hi.
Yeah. Hello. I've been subject to consultation for 12 years or more of exactly this kind of thing. And the sort of sad irony of it is the consultations, one that I was involved in, started in 2012, it brought the community together. But the community isn't a single community as well. You sort of mentioned the community. It's very easy to sort of think, oh, that's all of those group of people. One person represents them, or two, or three. But it's not. There's lots and lots of different communities and different forms of categorization. Going through these sort of consultations, I entirely agree. Sort of they're framed from the outset, and you you need an engagement with it and an understanding of political, technical, social, cultural processes that precede those consultations. You need to get to a point where you don't have to have the kind of consultations that are sort of happening now, because you've already got events and places of coming together and understanding. So I think that's where art plays a really important role. You've got informative spaces. Like, I really like your kind of social hubs. I think they're utterly vital, that kind of thing, that are welcome for lots of different types of people, not just the posh designer academic types, but it genuinely sort of, helping. I've often thought it'd be really good to have a workshop on a housing estate, to bring back caretakers, to build bits of furniture. So it was lovely seeing those kind of ideas. You need that groundwork beforehand, and that's also a big political project, because there's a different incentive to vote and to participate in political processes. So this is, it's this huge thing. and you kind of have to start small on those one-to-one connections and build those sort of networks and things like that. Don't know what the solution is, but it proceeds before design or reconfiguring environments are even thought about within authority, and that's what needs to be kind of done from my limited experience of 12 years.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's clearly a systemic problem, and that it requires, I think, that the residents or people who live in a neighbourhood can achieve some kind of agency or ownership over the space that is contentious. So Saskia brought up Unit 38. They have worked to wrest control from landowners on a legal front, on every front, but it's you have to get into that place where some control is taken away from the larger power. And then an idea of a community-led consultation or a campaign-led consultation is a completely different thing, becomes a different thing.
Can I just say something as well? I completely agree with you, and knowledge is power. And on that note, actually, I'm going to say something else about estate ballots that have featured a lot tonight, but they should, because they're kind of the vehicle through which demolition is happening on estates. Well, let's think about estate ballots for a minute and a yes or no vote. What are they voting for? Now, it appears from the materials that people have their one vote on what's going to happen to their estate, as in they're voting on this bit of paper. If there's a yes vote, that's it, the estate is demolished, that's, the end of the story. That's not correct. What that ballot is for is to release some funds from the Mayor of London. That's it. That's it. Yeah. It comes way before there's an actual statutory consultation at the planning stage. Now, I hate these ballots. Why? Because they can really kind of diminish the power of a campaign sometimes, because they feel like they pour everything into fighting. And that video was fabulous, by the way. I need to find out where you got it from, the video about vote no. Really good. And levels of rent. Brilliant. But when these ballots churn out yes votes, which they do, it can really kill a community spirit, all the different people on estates who might want to see a different outcome. And so a lot of the time when I go and speak to people, it's one of the first things I say. I say, yeah, absolutely go for it. It's really good to kind of push for what you want in this ballot. But what I will tell you now is that the fight is not over whatsoever on the outcome. And I feel like, again, that's a role that this consultation is playing around these ballots, because it does make people feel like it's their one opportunity to have a say. And it is not.
Sorry, can I ask you, in these ballots, is it 51% then it's yes? Or
Yeah.
What is the percentage?
Yeah, it's literally 51%.
It's like elections all over the place?
Yeah.
49.9.
Yeah, correct. It's like that. And an estate, one of the estates that I'm working with right now, we're talking about a 2% difference. The one thing to say about these ballots, which is why they're churning out yes votes as well, is because residents who live on estates who are in temporary accommodation, so they don't have a security of tenure, and sometimes they're in temporary accommodation for many years, sometimes up to 10 years. If they're eligible to vote in the ballot, and if it goes through, then they get promised a secure council tenancy. Now, who wouldn't vote yes? And when you talk about all different communities on a estate, you're ingraining division into that. They're very difficult things. But again, they were introduced in 2018, and I don't think they've even been properly tested in the court yet, actually. Anyway, I'll shut up about these ballots.
Do we have time for... Yeah. Last question, I think, or contribution.
Hi. Good evening to everybody. My name is Trevor Schoenfeld, and amongst my many roles, I'm Vice Chairman of BRAG, which is the Bloomsbury Residents Action Group. So this is our patch. And we are up against the local council, we're up against the National Assembly, the mayor, Oh, and the government too. Oh, and one other thing we've not mentioned, we're up against money.
Aye.
As I always say to developers when we conflict and we're having a consultation, before we start, let's get the ground rules right. You're the money, we're the people. So just let's recognise that, because then we know our terms of reference of game plan is clear. Problem you have illustrated so successfully tonight, I'm sorry that happens over in Hamburg as well as here, but I think it happens all over the world, is that people like money, they like a quick return. London here, and we're right on Bedford Square, the Dutch of Bedford, their estate has an interest, because guess what? They're going to be around, they have been around for a long time, they're going to be around for a long time. So they've got a stake in seeing something persist that is good, that works, with a long-term yield, not necessarily financial, but a social yield. On a bigger scale, we've got Camden. Poor Camden. Well, they're not that poor, but listen to them carefully. They don't have enough money. And development's really quite useful. We have lots of developments going on in London. You can see all the little cranes going everywhere. And they get paid to help it from the start. They get paid, the council get paid by the developer. The council love the 106, of course, and everything that goes with it, which is how they, in theory, provide benefit back to the community. In practice, spend it on their favourite scheme, or whatever hole in the budget they've got. And they've got central government pressuring them financially. And they've got to provide for the other end of the spectrum, people looking for housing, basic amenities, and sustenance in the society we live in. But they've got the whole cross-section. They're stressed for money. That's one. The final thing I can say is there's also that process you've so well illustrated, the multi-level strategies that's driven, first of all, by bureaucracy through a most complex map. Well, it's not even mapped, so you can't even see where you're going, but you've got to navigate through the unknown. And the council operators have to navigate through this as well. And so they're up. It's the job, isn't it? And at the end of the day, I'd like to keep my job, so I tick the box. I've done my job well. I've complied with all those little bits I'm meant to do in this development. And so the process is fueled by a complex, out-of-date, false, fake bureaucracy that serves no one, but which we all continue to support. So I'd like to ask you guys what your thoughts are in how do we really get to tackle some of the core issues, and that is a general appreciation of the community at the very top, including our national governments, and some genuine concern in the way we go about the planning process that reflects that interest. Because the one thing we've all got in common, wherever you live, and challenge me if you think I'm wrong, is that we all want to live in a place that's a good place to live. And we can start from there. You can expand it. It doesn't matter, whatever you are, whatever your persuasion in any shape or form, we quite like the idea of living in somewhere that we like. Thank you. Over to you.
Any responses, or should we carry on over drinks? Because I feel like... Or can we carry on?
Yeah, you carry on.
Carry on?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Responses, please.
Maybe it loosely relates to your statement, but also to the beginning question. So are there kind of examples where things went differently? And there are a lot of examples, of course, where things went differently, maybe not in this bureaucratically framed process, but elsewhere where communities were kind of powerful enough to kind of change, stop, modify, delay processes which were against their interests. And maybe one example, probably some of you heard about it, is happened in Berlin, Kreuzberg, nearby where I live. It's called Cotier & Co. at Cottbusser. So it was a kind of very diverse community of people of different backgrounds in big high-rise slabs built there in the 50s, 60s, which were privatized already. And this was already a fact there. And they just started to organize themselves. It was a graphic designer friend of mine, some architects who joined the group, who lived there in the neighborhood, and they built a kind of communal space there informally overnight, a Gittner condo. where people could meet. They made a campaign their own, and they started the debate about these buildings. And the Senate and the politicians were shocked about this, and there were so many people in the streets, what's happening there. They didn't know about things, and then they were enabled themselves to write a study about how this could be recommunalized, the building. They wrote a study, they made researchers in the buildings, they asked the government to pay them to do the study, and they went with the study, with the papers, they went to the local parliament, etc. And the building were bought back by the city after a while, and they were able to kind of, and they did both. They built up a community out of diverse sub-communities, and this was a powerful situation. And on the other hand, they were the ones kind of setting up the discourse, starting it, and also irritating the other players in the field. And I think this is key to many projects that I know, which have been in parts powerful, that they were able to kind of surprise the other side, they were able to organize themselves, understand themselves as a community, and that they did put up an idea which directions things should go, and not had just the option to vote no. I mean, the framing is quite clear. To say no is not that people like so much, and to say we want to live here together is a very nice thing.
That's why I think self-representation is so important, and self-representation, as you were saying, ahead of whatever is going to happen. And that's why I think infrastructures are important. Like, you're providing a lasting infrastructure, so it's not the happy coincidence that an architect and a graphic designer live in a building that is affected by something, or that, you know, you're actually providing something that can have a longer role, because that then begins to build a kind of consciousness that yes, we as people have things that we want to represent, we have views that we want to be heard, and I think that's a wonderful contribution beyond the individual projects, whether there's bits of furniture or monument and so on. I think it's the awareness that there is a point here that encourages us to think, what do we need? Like, what do we want to ask? What's the thing that we care about? And I think that's very similar to the Public Interest Law Centre, that then sort of provides a place where people can go, well, actually, you know, I need some help with the law here because there's something happening that isn't really right, and what can I do? And obviously most people don't know anything about law, so they can't do that themselves. They need you as an infrastructure. So
there's also, it's not just infrastructure, it's something that's been coming to my mind, is how do you feel about your expertise? Because each one of you has an expertise, and you're working with people who do not. And there's a tension between your expertise, their lack of expertise and knowledge, and getting to a place where you're on an equal footing. And that not that the tension resolves, but that you are able to, like, sort of power through or impart knowledge, or, I mean, really, how do you think about it? Is it bringing people up? Are you enabling?
I think it's an incredibly important question that we think about a lot, because I think that lawyers can do a lot of damage to campaigners if they come into a space and they say, oh, don't worry, the law will save you. Don't worry, we've got this. There's a problem in this country, maybe in other countries, where if you come into a room and you're a lawyer, you automatically get respect. And I don't think you should automatically get respect. I think you should earn respect. And so, you know, when we go and meet whoever, campaigners, residents, whoever, we are very clear from the start that we're there to assist them with their campaign aims. That the law is just a tool of one of many tools, that the law will not solve the situation, but will explain to them how it can be useful. And we always say, we're your representatives in the hostile environment of the court, because the courtroom is a hostile environment to everyday people, and that's who we are. We're going to deal with this battle over there because we understand how these processes work, but we are working for you. And I think that's how, that's how we approach it anyway, to try and diminish the role of the lawyer or the law while also offering the tools.
Yeah, super interesting. The same is true for architects and designers. They can do and did a lot of damage to cities, neighborhoods, communities, and if they don't think critical about their own role in it, they will do damage and make false promises and just go to the next project if money runs out or time is short. So this is quite problematic about these professional encounters. There, on the other hand, I think profession has also something to offer, and it's really about a kind of critical self-understanding at which moments strategically we play this professional role and in which fields we don't have any professional knowledge. And especially if we talk about urban life, everydayness, city situations, of course, the people living there, they know much more about the situation, and they set the themes, they bring in the issues, they tell us what to deal with, and then we can hopefully bring in some expert knowledge or some tools, and then it's also good to have these tools and not say, we're all the same, we don't know nothing, let's have some good time together. No, we are there also with our knowledge that we have acquired, the luxury that we had to have this knowledge, and then we're also obliged to bring in that knowledge, but not from the beginning, from a hierarchy position, but at a certain moment where it is regarded as helpful from the perspective of those asking us to support them. And I think this is often very confusing also when architects, artists, designers discuss about, do we work with people, do we work for people, do we represent them, do we collaborate? I think everything is part of it, but we have to negotiate it, and we cannot say that we are on the same level and forget about our competence. Then we are not interesting for them. Then we should go home. We have something to bring in. And that's super
really
interesting
agree.
about the lawyers, because they know about this competence much more clearly than often designers do, for example.
And I think of your work, your practice, is almost looking at the expertise and undoing it in a way, or the facade of expertise and information, and that your sculptures are breaking it down and be like, no, I mean, this is not expert knowledge data that is going to teach you something.
I think I'm trying to make objects that could be made by anybody, and everybody has broomsticks. We all have old mattresses, you know. So if you were trying to understand a complex bit of information, you could try and make it understandable to yourself through a kind of model. And to be really honest, I make these things just because I don't understand most of these stats and graphs and things that are thrown at me in these really boring bureaucratic documents. And by sort of making this thing in a kind of very simple way, so yes, there is that kind of element of kind of going, here are the experts and they're telling you what the stats are and what the data is, but actually you're the experts because you live here, or whatever, you're experiencing the struggle. Try and make your own representations, because these guys are just creating a narrative. So, you know, so could you. And if you have to, then do it with broomsticks and mattresses, you know, because we all understand that, you know, that sort of slick looking stuff isn't any more true than whatever you can create. So that's, I think, the kind of ethos.
But isn't it also you as a professional artist who knows that it's possible to build something three-dimensional out of pure stuff in a certain time, who has a kind of also a capacity of understanding what these tools can do socially? I mean, you bring in a professional perspective. It's not, but maybe it's a different role in this kind of the planning experts and the inhabitants. But I think this is. It would be interesting to understand really what kind of expertise, knowledge, or perspective can we bring in, and we can bring in something. Otherwise, you wouldn't work there and wouldn't look that crazy and funny and nice. And where are we more or less anti-experts?
Well, I think artists are experts in representation.
Yeah.
And as I said in the beginning, I think aesthetic representation is super important. It's key.
Exactly.
So I'm not an expert in anything else. Unfortunately, I'd love to be a lawyer. But I can
Want to be an artist, what can I say?
I can try and, or whatever, we could swap. But I can think about representation and produce other ways of representing things.
I'm sorry, Tom.
That's next week.
And we've got next week, that's right. And we can carry on talking in the room over there where there are some drinks. But I just wanted to thank our speakers and all of you for joining in. So thanks very much. And please join us next week when we'll be talking about artists, activists with a number of other speakers.